Okay, so let's get started. So first thing I want to do is I want to open up my board class, which I already have open here. And I'm going to do a couple things really quickly here. So a script can contain more than one class. It just has one class, that's its main class, and this class has to match up with whatever the name of the file is. But you can add extra classes to this if you need to. So I'm going to add a teeny tiny little data holder class here as part of my board. And I'm going to call this public class, I'm going to call it tile type. And this is just going to hold a little bit of information about the kind of background tile we have. So I'm going to have a public integer, which is its x value, the x position in the grid. I'm going to have another integer, which is the y value in the grid. And then I want to know if it's what kind of tile it is. So I'm going to create another little enumerator here, just like I did before for my game state. An enumerator is something that can only be one of a fixed number of settings. So like this enumerator can be wait or move. It can only ever be one of those two things. It's kind of like a Boolean that can have extra values. So I'm going to create another enumerator here as well. I'm going to call this, pardon me, public enumerator. We'll call this, I don't know, tile kind. That's a little confusing, using two synonyms almost here. And this is going to be the kinds of tiles that we can have in our scene. So we can have breakable tiles, which will be like the jellies, which we'll get to soon. We can have blank tiles, which is going to be the empty spaces. We can have normal tiles. And then if you were to have like the licorice tiles, where it's similar to the breakable tile, but you can't move them, then that would be something that you'd add here too, but I'm not going to be covering that in this tutorial. When you're doing an enumerator, the last thing doesn't get a comma, but the ones that come before it do. So I'm just going to use that little tile kind here. I'm going to make it public tile kind, and I'm just going to do lowercase t, uppercase k. And I'm going to save that really quickly here. Now, what I want to do is I want to make an array of these tile types. So, somewhere here in my board's global variables, I'm going to make a public tile type array, and I'm going to call it board layout. So, I'm going to save that really quickly here. Now, if I jump back into Unity, you'll notice something. Even though I've made this array public, if I go back to Unity and let it compile, I won't be able to see that array show up. Which usually, if you make an array public, like we did with our dots, you can see it in the inspector. The problem is, since this is a custom class I created, Unity doesn't know if it's something that it can display in the editor, which is called serializing. So you have to add a tag to the top in square brackets to tell it that this is something that it can serialize. And so in square brackets up above of my tile type class there, I'm doing system.serializable. I'm going to save my script, pop back into Unity here. And now once it compiles, I should be able to see my array of my board layout. So I'm going to start with 6 things here, and you'll notice that each of these doesn't just have one part to it. Each of them has an X and Y and a kind. So I'm going to make all of these blank, and I'm just going to come up with a few different positions. So I'm going to do 0, 0, I'm going to do 6, 9, and then this is blank. I'm going to do 6, 0, and this is blank, and then I'll do 0, 9, and this is blank, so that's the 4 corners of the board, and then I'll do 2 more. Let's do 4, 4, make this blank, and let's do 1 more. Let's do 5, 4, and make this one blank as well. Now, if I hit play, this doesn't do anything. I just created a data container, and then I used that data container, but I didn't actually use it to do anything. I need to change my dimensions back too. So what I'm going to do here really quickly, I'm going to make my width 7, my height 10. Let's try that again here. So, oops. Ideally, I should see empty spaces at my 4 corners, and then at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. These 2 spaces should be empty as well, but they're not. And the reason why is we're not using that for anything. I'm also going to add my padding back in here of 2, because that's a little too zoomed in. Sorry, I should have modified all this back earlier. All right, that looks better. Okay, so the main idea here, pardon me, is you want to check a few things. First, when you're creating your new dots, you only want to create a dot at a place where it's not currently supposed to be blank. Also, when you're collapsing your columns, you want to take those blank spots into account. And then also, when you're regenerating your dots, you want to take those blank spots into account. So, first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new method here that I'm going to call generate blank spaces. So I'm going to say public void generate blank spaces. And the reason I'm doing this is I'm going to read from my board layout what kind of tile it is, and if it's a blank tile, then I'm going to turn it into a blank space essentially. And to help me do that, let's see, do I need to do that really? Yeah, I might as well. Okay, sorry, I was talking to myself. So what I want to do here is I want to change this private background tile, 2-dimensional array, all tiles. I want to change this into something else. Do I? Sorry, hold on a second. Okay, sorry about that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to change this from a 2-dimensional array of background tiles into a 2-dimensional array of booleans. If you remember, boolean values are values that can only be true or false, and I'm going to call this array blank spaces. This is slightly different than the way I've done it in a previous version of the project, but I actually think this is going to work out better. I think I only referenced blank spaces one other time, and that's down here in the start method. So I'm going to do blank spaces is equal to a new 2-dimensional array of booleans, and booleans are only either true or false. And the reason I want to do this is I'm going to be looking at my board layout, and I'm going to say for integer I is equal to 0, I is less than board layout dot length I plus plus. What I want to do is I want to look at that that index in the board layout. So if I'm looking at my board class here, I want to look at element 0 and ask myself if it's blank, and if it is blank, I'm going to make that spot in the 2-dimensional array true. Otherwise, the 2-dimensional array will default everything being false. So I'm going to say if board layout I dot tile kind is equal to tile kind dot blank. So essentially what I'm doing here is I'm going from double equals. Essentially what I'm doing here is I'm going from 0 to however many things are in the board layout dot length. So if there's nothing in here, it won't do anything. But so I'm looking at all of these elements here, my 6 elements, and checking to see if any of them are blank. This way I can have blank tiles, I can have breakable tiles, I can have normal tiles, or those licorice tiles. And we're checking if it's that, and then if it is, then we're going to do our blank spaces, and I want to do board layout I dot x board layout I dot y is equal to true. Otherwise, Unity will default to making that false. So I'm going to save this. So now what I've done is I've taken this board layout array and I've turned it into a two-dimensional array of booleans, values that are either true or false. And then what I want to do in here is before I create my dots, I'm going to say if not board layout, blank spaces. And I want to check blank spaces ij. And I only want to do this if blank spaces ij is false. And if you're checking for just a plain Boolean value, you can say equals equals false, or you can just use that exclamation point at the beginning, which means not, which automatically checks if it's false. So I'm only going to create a dot if that spot is false. So I'm going to save here. And if I go back into Unity, my sloppy coding earlier is going to cause an issue. And I'll explain where that issue is and how to fix it. So if I hit play, nope, didn't cause an issue here. Why didn't it? Oh, it didn't cause an issue because I never called generate blank spaces. So in my setup method here, before I do my double for loop, I'm going to do generate blank spaces. So I'm going to save that, pop back into Unity, hit play, and when it's done thinking, I should get my error. Yeah. So it was fine with this, and it was fine with this. So I've got my two little blank spaces here. But as soon as it got to 4, the reason that this is a blank space is because when it checked 4, 5 requires it to see if there's a match, and by seeing if there's a match, it checks down and to the left. And when it checked down, it checked here, but this is null, and I didn't have a catch built into my programming to fix that because I was being sloppy. So those sloppy errors are rearing their head again. So here's what we need to do. We need to go into the matches at method, and the reason why it gave an error, like I said, is because here column was greater than 1, row was greater than 1. When it was checking row -1 and row -2, so this is line 101, I'm willing to bet without even looking, line 101, it was referencing these even though they were null. So what I have to do here is before each of these individual if statements, I need to add a catch. So I'm going to say if all dots column -1 row is not equal to null, and all dots column -2 row is not equal to null, then this if statement I just did only encapsulates that very first if statement because the two of them aren't dependent on each other. And I have to do another if statement for this next one. So if all dots column row -1 is not equal to null, and all dots column row -2 is not equal to null. Okay, so I fixed that, but now I need to fix it for here too. So I'm going to do the same thing before this if statement. If all dots column row -1 is not equal to null, and all dots column row -2 is not equal to null, and catch that single if statement inside this null catch here, and then one more null catch, and my sloppy work will be mostly resolved. There's going to be another issue that's going to come up with this. So if all dots column -1 row is not equal to null, and all dots column -2 row, oops, row, good lord, is not equal to null. And then, okay, cool. So if I save that now, if I pop back into Unity here, I'll let it compile. And then I'll hit play. I'll actually be patient this time. It should generate with the holes where we want them. So there we go. Now, the problem here, though, is I've only done this so that it generates with the blank spaces. If I make a match anywhere, like here, it automatically collapses and fills everything in. And that's due to our collapse routine and our fill routine. The other thing that's an issue here, and this is related to the bug fixes in part 24, if I pull into the blank space, I get that null reference exception error again. So we have two things we need to fix here, but this is kind of long enough for this first part. I'll publish the second part to this tomorrow, and then we can continue this. But for now, this is going to be part 1. All right, so if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them below. Like I said, we will finish this tomorrow. You will get a video about this tomorrow. Please feel free to follow me on Twitter. I have a link to the current version of the project in the description. And yeah, have yourself a wonderful evening.